Okay, so as promised, this is going to be a continuation of the Western expansion and going to be kind of part two of the story. It's going to be dealing exclusively with the Native Americans and the Indian Wars and ultimately the United States' policy towards these people. So we're going to be kind of rewinding in time here a little bit to really kind of right before 1850 when you're going to be getting the influx of the settlers moving into the West as a result of the gold rushes that we've talked about. And what happened is you really had a large number of people out here already. You approximately had, about a 250,000. The number I have here is about 225,000. It's a number of different tribes. You can see on the map all the different types of the names of these different groups, and this isn't one entity. I think that's really one of the most important things to understand going into this, that all of these different groups have very different opinions on how things should be handled, and they're going to have very different dealings with the United States government in their own right. And as a result of that, the policy that one tribe takes up and makes with the United States government might take as a whole, but might not necessarily represent the feelings of the different groups in the given area. So this area in the plains, really before 1850, when you get this expansion due to the gold rushes, it really was seen as this unusable land. The quote I have here is this great American desert. The western plains, in that rain shadow of the Colorado Rockies and the Rocky Mountains, it doesn't get much water. So this area, if you remember, it's not very easy to live in. And as a result, the Americans didn't really feel like they wanted it. And it wasn't until you're going to get this expansion as a result of the gold rushes that things are going to change. So as a result of the harsh realities of living out on the plains, the natives were obviously well adapted to this and to living on the plains, and really when it came down to it, most of these groups, especially in the plains areas, they lived off of the buffalo. It was very important to their way of life. They used it for their food, they used it for clothing, they used the skins for their shelters, and the animal was extremely important to them, and they mostly operated as kind of a nomadic group in most cases, kind of wandering and following the herds throughout this territory. And this is going to become a major problem for these people, because as settlers start moving in westward, you're going to get a drastic reduction of the numbers of the buffalo from hunting from the whites. You really have, efforts to really kill a lot of these buffalo, and in some cases you have hunting that's being done for sport from the trains. You have people just out there killing the buffalo, and the numbers are drastically reduced until a point where the buffalo almost actually goes extinct, and that's going to really hurt the Native American way of life. So the natives in the plains ultimately adapted to using the horse. If you remember, the horse really wasn't a native animal to the Americas, so these people had been thriving, for many years without the horse. But once the horse made its way to the Americas with the Europeans, they're going to really begin to utilize the horse to be able to move around the plains much more quickly. And these people, they're going to grow up on the horse, right? They're going to be used to riding. They're going to, be on horses from young ages, and they're going to get very good on them. And they were really effective fighters off of the horse. They could make, quick attacks, utilizing the horse and the speed of the horse in comparison. They had, were really good archers. They had these kind of short bows that could be, fire quickly and accurately, pretty quick bursts in comparison to, the earlier muskets and such, until you get some kind of quicker loading rifles, when ultimately the Native American will mostly take up to utilizing the rifle kind of over these bows against the United States military as we move into the wars that we're going to be talking about. So the American government adopted a policy toward the Native Americans as early as 1820 with Andrew Jackson and deciding to really kind of just push the eastern Native Americans out of the land and kind of across the Mississippi River, believing kind of that idea that this great American desert, which we just talked about, that the land west of the Mississippi was really not useful for white settlers. And this idea was going to rapidly change when you get the discovery of gold out in California and ultimately elsewhere around the country. And you're going to start to get that influx of settlers that we've already talked about. You're going to have these settlers, traders, trappers, miners moving into these areas to kind of now begin their life out there. And you're going to get tensions kind of growing and mounting now as these settlers move west on these trails like the Oregon Trail, heading into Native American land, and the natives aren't going to really like them trespassing. So you get these raids on settlers moving west, and this is going to kind of lead to a rethinking of policy from the United States, and you're going to get a treaty created called the Fort Laramie Treaty, which was kind of going to now push these natives into new areas which would kind of belong to the natives exclusively on these reservation lands, and that they wouldn't be bothered. But it was also an agreement that these people moving westward on these trails are no longer going to be attacked by these natives and for payment. If they were hoping for about $50,000 every year for up to 50 years, and this wasn't necessarily paid the whole way through. But the signing of this treaty by some of these groups out there really did kind of lead to a bit of a brief period of peace in this before it really heats up later on. So the gold that's discovered in Colorado at Pikes Peak and the gold rush that followed in Colorado is going to really kind of lead to some of the chiefs of these natives in the area kind of giving up some of that reservation land. And this is going to basically anger some of these groups. They really feel that this land was being kind of signed away by a small minority of leaders in these communities. Remember, you have kind of cultures of these natives, but when it comes down to it, you kind of have smaller groups and subgroups in this. So some of these subgroups chiefs were kind of signing away some of this land when the other leaders were not in really agreement. And you're going to get kind of a refusal to leave out of these lands, which they had just kind of accepted as part of the Fort Laramie Treaty in 1851, and they're going to refuse to leave and get off that land. And that's going to kind of cause some problems now going forward. So the treatyless natives that we had just kind of talked about, they start causing problems for the United States militias and military in Colorado, around this gold rush that had been taking place. So what happens is you get a group of Cheyenne and Arapaho natives that are looking to kind of distance themselves from this and to kind of continue this peace, and they move to one of these forts set up by the United States, and from there they actually get relocated to what is known as Big Sand Creek, and they believed they were under the U.S. protection, having been moved to kind of where they were told. And what you get is known as the SANDCREEK Massacre. You actually have a militia force from Colorado come and just outright massacre this group of Native Americans. It's 100+ men, women, and children ultimately killed in absolutely brutal means. And it's a largely women and children actually, and this is kind of going to really start off some aggressive responses by the natives in the West, and it's going to kind of really begin what is known as these Indian Wars and the Indian conflicts on the West going forward. And these aggressive native responses are actually going to really kind of, again, lead to new policy by the United States, just pushing these Native Americans onto even smaller and smaller reservations. I just wanted to kind of read a quote by a man kind of testifying before Congress, about the SANDCREEK massacre, just to kind of show the barbarity of what actually ensued. And the quote, it goes as so. I saw the bodies of those lying there cut all to pieces, worse mutilated than any I ever saw before. The women cut all to pieces, with knives, scalped, their brains knocked out, children 2 or 3 months old, all ages lying there, from sucking infants up to warriors. By whom were they mutilated? By the United States troops, by a man named John Smith in 1865, testifying before Congress. I'm going to fast forward here a couple years from 1864 to 1868, when you actually have the creation of another treaty, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, kind of signed by the Lakota people, who are also known as the Sioux or Teton Sioux, and they signed this treaty, and it basically again authorizes them into a this reservation land, which is going to make up a large majority of the Dakotas, and in particularly the Black Hills, which was really sacred land to this Lakota people. And what happens is you get a discovery of gold up into this area, and just very rapidly, like we talked about in our expansion earlier, that you get thousands of white settlers kind of hearing about this and moving into the Black Hills, and what happens is the people, the whites, they actually try to renegotiate the terms of the treaty. And what happens is, once the Lakota don't agree to the renegotiation, the army is actually moved into the territory to ultimately push the Lakota out of the Black Hills and out of this territory to make it kind of safe to the whites that are using that want to use this land for their own purposes, in particular in the mining. And you're going to get a group of Lakota that are outraged by this, and they refuse to leave the land, led by a group of men known as Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. They lead this resistance of the Lakota and the Cheyenne, who absolutely don't, that refuse to leave this territory. With the refusal to leave the territory, what you get is kind of a three-pronged assault by the United States to kind of force the Lakota out. And what's going to happen is known as the Battle of Little Bighorn. And one of these groups is actually led by General George Armstrong Custer. For those of you that don't know about him, he's really kind of a hot-headed, kind of arrogant general. In this case, being sent to clear this land, of the Lakota. He had used surprise attacks on other Native Americans elsewhere earlier in his career that had worked, and in this case, he goes ahead. He didn't really wait for reinforcements. He hoping to kind of pull the same kind of move and surprise the encampment before they could. He was thinking we would run away. And when he gets to this encampment on the Little Bighorn, he has over 2,000 plus Sioux, Lakota people waiting there. You have a large number of warriors. The encampment is much larger than expected, and Custer is ultimately slaughtered and killed, along with 264 of his men. These Custer's charge down into this encampment. And this is going to be a relatively short-lived victory for the Lakota. The U.S., you have a public shock and outrage over this slaughter of Custer, who was a bit of a celebrity figure, and it's going to kind of lead to thousands of more troops being, brought into this area to really pursue the Lakota. After this, you have this band of this large group of Lakota that kind of disperses all over the place, and there's going to be other battles that are taking place and that don't go nearly as well. And you're going to have, some of the leaders captured, killed, or even just kind of fleeing. And Sitting Bull, the main leader of this resistance, he's actually going to flee all the way to Canada and up into Canada, leaving the jurisdiction of the United States, and he's going to remain there for 4 years before his people just are starving, and they're forced back. There were not sufficient buffalo herds to kind of to feed his people up in Canada. And his people are starving. It's going to kind of force his men back into the United States, and he's forced to surrender. When he comes back across, he's forced into these reservations in the Dakotas, in particular this place called Standing Rock, the reservation Standing Rock Agency, and he himself is actually going to be killed on the reservation land during a arrest gone bad. For fear he's going to join what is known as the Ghost Dance movement, which we will be talking about momently and a little bit more about the story. So this is just a map of the transition and the removing of the reservation land of the Lakota people. You can just kind of see how this land, if you look at the pink kind of outline there, was the extent of their land, at the time of this Fort Laramie Treaty, and the gold being discovered in the Black Hills, and that ultimately you can just kind of see the losses of this land until you look at the red, which is actually the current reservation land now in the Dakotas. So you also get what's called the Nez-Perce War, and you're going to have a forced removal of the Nez-Perce people from their ancestral lands in Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. You are actually going to have what's known as the Treaty of Walla Walla in 1855 that basically guarantees a lot of this land for them, but sadly just 6 years later in 1861 you're going to have a group of this Nez-Perce again, signing away a majority of this land, and they don't necessarily represent the will of these people, and that's what you're going to get. You're going to get this a lot, where you have these smaller subgroups, as I kind of mentioned before, signing away this land, and it's not necessarily representing the interests of everyone. And in this case, that's what happens, and you have a man named Chief Joseph who leads a kind of retreat from a attack, basically, by the United States on these people, basically being forced out and attempt to be captured. And you have this man named Chief Joseph who leads kind of about 250 warriors and about 500 women and children, on this 1,200-mile chase by the United States military, and they're being attacked repeatedly, and Chief Joseph and his men actually kind of win battle after battle after battle, during this retreat, and it's going to take a toll. You're going to have, many of these people being killed as they go. They're killing more Americans than they're losing, but over a long enough period of time and kind of battle after battle and skirmish, over 1,200 miles, your numbers are going to kind of start to run thin, and Chief Joseph and his men are actually caught just shy of Canada, and they were heading toward Sitting Bull's camp, which we had just talked about up in Canada. They were trying to get across the border to again leave the jurisdiction of the United States to get to a friendly group that would kind of help them out. So this is an image of Chief Joseph's retreat and kind of how close he's actually going to get, and how far they hoped they were going to get. And you can see it's a long trip. They're leaving Oregon kind of right over here where my mouse is, and they're going to be kind of on this retreat for over 1,000 miles while the United States kind of keeps hitting them. You can kind of see these swords here kind of mark different battles that they are encountering, and it's really just a sad thing that's going on because the Nez-Perce were one of the first Native American groups that had really any interaction with the United States in the West. Lewis and Clark, they had actually experienced the Nez-Perce, and the Nez-Perce were very friendly to Lewis and Clark when they didn't need to be. And if it wasn't for the generosity of the Nez Perce, the Lewis and Clark's expedition might have failed. And over the long period of time, the Nez Perce had really never openly taken up arms against the United States until this point. And they were a friendly group, sadly, and they were still being treated like this. And it just kind of sums up, to some extent, the mentality that was being dealt with here against the Native Americans. And it's really
Sorry
a
for
sad
the
wall of text here. But this is a really important quote, I felt, from Chief Joseph after he was caught, and this is him after he surrenders. So tell General Howard I know his heart. What he told me before, I have it in my heart. I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. Tahulhul Shoot is dead. The old men are all dead. It is the young men who say yes or no. He who led on the young men is dead. It is cold and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death. I want to have time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. I think this quote, if nothing else, just really sums up how tired these people were of what they had to face out there on the West, against the United States, and how they were being treated. He just wants to look after his people. Chief Joseph, all he wants to know, if his people are dead, if they're where they are, he wants to be able to help them. And he's tired, and he's just sick and tired of it all. And the quote is summed up right there at the end, where I will fight no more forever, and that I'm done kind of with all of this, and it's just not worth it anymore, and that he's all done. Of the horrible things that were done to the Native Americans, really they didn't go unnoticed, and they really kind of forced a major change in public opinion. You have literature being written that kind of dramatizes this problem that the natives were being dealt with, and the literature and such that was going on kind of made what was happening a bit unfavorable. People weren't necessarily happy about it, and there was an attempt in 1887 called the DAWES Act at policy reform that really was a well-meaning attempt to kind of help these natives, but it didn't necessarily work out that way. And the DAWES Act was an attempt to kind of Americanize these natives, and the idea was that it would break up these tribal lands that had been given to them in these reservations, and it was going to basically Americanize these people by giving them individual allotments to families, that families would essentially get a certain number of acres, that they would be able to become homesteaders, that they would essentially become like Americans, and from the reservation lands. So it was well-meaning to some extent, but there were some major problems with it, and people kind of took advantage of it, and some of the white people for sure more or less acted like vultures, when what happened was it was decided that the land that wasn't allocated, these allotments that weren't given away to these natives, that was left after all of it was said and done, the land was essentially going to be offered to white homesteaders now, that they could buy this land, and when they did, typically sometimes this was some of the best land in certain cases that were being left for the whites, but when you now have these whites buying up these lands from these reservations, it really just kind of further decreases the size of the Indian land and what would be considered part of these reservations, and it's really just kind of sad. So you can see here a poster from actually 1911, so a little while after the DAWES Act is actually passed, but they're still selling, this Native American land. You can, see it, Indian land for sale. Get a home of your own. Easy payments. You can get the land quickly. Fine lands in the West. They're, ready to go. You can graze on them. This is the number of acres that are being sold in each of these spots for how much per acre. It's giving up this Indian land again because they essentially had no more natives to give the land to, so they figured they would, give it to the whites. And it's, yeah, just again, it's just a sad thing that's happening to these people, just further hurting them because they absolutely didn't want this. They were happy with the tribal systems that they had. They didn't want to kind of have these individual allotments for themselves. So this takes us to what's known as the ghost dance movement. And the ghost dance movement is kind of this new religious movement that's going to kind of spread across the nation, in particular these Native American groups that are left, led by a man named Jack Wilson, who claimed to be this prophet who his Native American name was Wavoka. And he had claimed that God had essentially shown him that the Native Americans really should no longer engage in war, and they really shouldn't fight one another, and that if they were to follow God's laws and rules here, that they would essentially meet their lost loved ones again in another world, kind of in God's presence, kind of similar to heaven. There'd be no sickness, disease, or old age. There's some similarities to Christianity here, and he even went as far as saying that Jesus was going to be kind of reincarnated on Earth in actually 1892. But there became this permeating belief that if the ghost dance was done properly, it would essentially lead to Earth's evil being just swept away, that the whites would be kind of just removed and taken away, and the buffalo herds would come back, and they would be ultimately, happy again. They'd be on their old lands, and they'd have the buffalo, and this permeated through the Native Americans, and it's really going to get to be a relatively large movement. And as the result of the popularity of it, you're going to have the Bureau of Indian Affairs kind of fearing it, and they're kind of fearing that it would lead to, again, some more armed resistance by the Native Americans. This video is actually a video of the ghost dance being performed in the early 1900s, what it would have looked like. So I just wanted to kind of show you this. This is a really old video, so pardon the quality here, but I just wanted to kind of let you watch this for a couple seconds. So that's you're going to get what's known as the massacre at Wounded Knee on December 29th, 1890, which this is going to more or less be, it is the general consensus of when you're going to get the end of this armed resistance by the Native Americans, during these Indian Wars. So the story goes, after Sitting Bull's death, among, his arrest, he had been arrested by a group of Lakota policemen that had, come to take him because of the fear that he was one of the leaders of, if not otherwise going to be joining the ghost dance movement, really making it even more scary for the whites that lived in the area about, the uprising that could be as a result of it. So after his death, you're going to have a group of these Lakota leaving the reservation to kind of join up with the other leaders. In particular, the one is named Spotted Elk, and they actually get caught. They end up getting escorted back into the reservation land at Wounded Knee Creek. They even were kind of given up. They didn't really feel like the ghost dance movement was what they wanted anymore, and they were kind of coming back, under peaceful terms, to get back into the reservations. And ultimately, they get brought to this Wounded Knee Creek, and over the course of that evening, you're going to get about 500 troops and even 4 cannon kind of surround these people, and you get an order to disarm these Lakota in the morning. And the exact trigger is a bit debated of kind of what actually starts this, but once this order to disarm the Lakota went out, supposedly there was a deaf Native American and he was kind of uncomfortable with what was going on. He didn't know what was going on, and it's believed that his rifle may have accidentally fired. And once that rifle went off, you just have a complete opening up by the American soldiers on the Lakota, and it's really sad because before this, what was going on, there's this picturesque field where you have these children, playing in this field, and men even playing with the kids, and once this happens, they open up and they kill, as many as 300 or so. There's different estimates. No one really knows the numbers exactly for sure, but anywhere between 50 to 100 men and 200 to 250 women and children were killed in this, and it's a horrible atrocity that took place. These people were just gunned down. The women and children had really no hope whatsoever, and they're just being massacred in this all over some kind of really stupid little misunderstanding when it really comes down to it. And this is going to be really looked on as one of these horrible things of these Indian wars. And again, this is kind of really the end of the armed resistance, even though you're going to kind of get some resistance kind of around the country, going even into the 20th century from smaller bands here or there. But as a general kind of deal, this is kind of seen as the end of this, and the Ghost Dance movement, are going to surrender more or less kind of right after this. Show some pictures of Wounded Knee and kind of the aftermath of it, and this right here is a picture of kind of the mass grave that was dug, after Wounded Knee to bury these natives. In fact, the Native American bodies that had been killed really were just kind of left in the open to freeze on the open plain for a number of days before it was decided upon to even bury them. This is a picture of the leader of the Lakota here in this particular instance, named Spotted Elk. He actually had been sick leading up to this, and he actually had pneumonia and wasn't doing particularly well. But this is just a picture of his body, obviously frozen from the cold temperatures here in the snow, kind of after this battle that took place, the massacre, really, more than the battle. And this, lastly, is a photograph of the United States military men actually posing with 3 of the cannons that had been used at Wounded Knee, that had been shelling the teepees in this encampment of the Lakota. Well, this is people. Where I'm going to leave you. The horrible things that the United States did to the Native American groups and how they were treated is really one of the biggest shames that our country kind of has in our nation's past, and it's really one of those things that it's uncomfortable to talk about because it really is that disturbing and that sad. The basically complete genocide, more or less, of these groups of people that had lived here for many years before the whites even showed up, who just really wanted nothing more than to kind of live their own lives on their own land, similar to the whites. Many of the whites who just wanted to kind of get by and live their own lives. That's what these Native Americans wanted to do, and sadly, this what we just talked about is kind of the end result of that.